They looked like the perfect newlyweds, smiling in wedding photos, hands entwined, eyes full of promise. But just days into their honeymoon in Australia, one of them would be dead at the bottom of a cliff, and the other would be exposed as a cold-blooded killer. What began as a celebration of love ended as one of the most shocking betrayals imaginable. Elena Santiago had always been the kind of woman people admired quietly. She was gentle, hardworking, and full of quiet optimism about life. As a nurse in a small hospital in Manila, she spent most of her days caring for others and dreaming of a future where she could build a family of her own. That dream seemed to come true when she met Marco Santiago, a charming Filipino engineer working overseas in Dubai. Their first meeting happened through a mutual friend's online post, and soon, they were chatting every night, finding comfort in each other's words. Marco was confident, well-spoken, and attentive, the kind of man who made promises sound believable. Within months, he was sending her flowers, expensive gifts, and messages filled with love. After nearly 2 years of long-distance romance, Marco flew back to the Philippines to finally meet her in person. Their connection seemed instant, as if everything they had shared online had come to life. He proposed during a sunset dinner at a beach resort, kneeling before her with a diamond ring that sparkled as brightly as her future dreams. The wedding came a few months later, a beautiful church ceremony surrounded by laughter, music, and family pride. Elena's parents were overjoyed, believing their daughter had found the stability and love she deserved. Marco appeared devoted, showering her with affection and making grand promises about their life together abroad. But beneath the fairy tale atmosphere, small cracks already existed, ones no one noticed. Marco's smile sometimes faded too quickly, his phone calls became secretive, and his words carried hidden impatience. Still, Elena ignored every uneasy feeling. She believed love was enough to fix anything. She had no idea she was walking straight into the final chapter of her own story. Australia had always been Elena's dream destination. She had seen pictures of the blue waters, golden beaches, and vibrant city lights of Sydney. When Marco suggested it for their honeymoon, she felt grateful and excited, convinced it was a thoughtful gesture from her new husband. They boarded the flight just 3 days after their wedding, holding hands as they talked about their future. To anyone watching, they looked like two people in love, beginning a lifetime of shared adventures. When they landed, Marco seemed tired but cheerful. He arranged a luxury hotel overlooking the harbor and promised Elena the most unforgettable trip of her life. The first few days were filled with sightseeing and laughter. Elena took photos of everything: the opera house, the harbor bridge, the wildlife parks. She posted smiling selfies online, proudly captioning them honeymoon bliss. But behind the lens, Marco's mood began to shift. He grew distant, distracted, and oddly tense. He spent long hours scrolling through his phone or stepping out to make calls he wouldn't explain. Elena, trying not to ruin their honeymoon, brushed off her worries. She told herself marriage took time to adjust to, that Marco was just stressed from work or travel fatigue. Hotel staff later recalled small moments that didn't fit the picture-perfect honeymoon. During check-in, they noticed a brief argument, quiet but sharp. At breakfast, Marco barely spoke, eating quickly before leaving her alone at the table. Even their room attendants sensed tension in the air. Elena still tried to make everything feel normal, planning dinners and beach walks to reconnect. Yet Marco's eyes seemed elsewhere, cold and preoccupied. What Elena didn't know was that their dream vacation had never been about love or celebration. It was part of Marco's carefully constructed plan. By the 4th day of their honeymoon, Elena could no longer ignore the unsettling changes in Marco's behavior. He had become withdrawn, rarely smiling or engaging in the light-hearted conversations that once came so easily. When she suggested exploring new places or dining at romantic spots, he dismissed her with vague excuses about business calls or headaches. His eyes seemed distant, his tone clipped, as if every word she spoke irritated him. What confused Elena most was how quickly his warmth had disappeared. The man who had once called her his world now acted like a stranger. She noticed he often left the hotel alone, saying he needed to sort something out. He returned hours later, his clothes dusty and his expression unreadable. One evening, she saw him packing and unpacking a large black duffel bag, refusing to explain what was inside. The next morning, he suddenly announced that they would be taking a drive to a coastal area called Cape Solace, a scenic spot known for its cliffs and ocean views. Elena hesitated. She had never heard of it, but Marco assured her it was beautiful and peaceful, perfect for photos. Hotel cameras later showed Marco loading the duffel bag into their rental car, his movements calm and deliberate. Elena followed, smiling faintly, unaware of the danger she was stepping into. As they drove away, the staff remembered seeing her wave at the front desk, full of trust and excitement. It would be the last time anyone saw her alive. Marco's silence on the road, the eerie calm in his face, and the isolated destination he chose were not coincidences. Every detail was part of a quiet, sinister script he had written long before their honeymoon began. The air was heavy with mist as the couple's car wound along the narrow road leading to Cape Solace. It was a lonely stretch of coastline, where rugged cliffs met the crashing waves below. Few tourists visited that far-off spot, especially at dusk, when the sky dimmed and the wind howled through the rocks. Locals later recalled seeing a small vehicle parked near the lookout point that evening, its engine still running long after sunset. What happened next would remain a mystery until morning. Just before dawn, hikers discovered scattered belongings near the edge of the cliff: a purse, a pair of sandals, a scarf torn at one end, and a single earring glinting faintly in the sand. The sight was unsettling, but it was the view below that froze them in horror. Lying among the jagged rocks was the body of a woman. Police and rescue teams arrived quickly, carefully recovering the remains that had been battered by the fall. The identification came soon after. It was Elena Santiago. At first, the authorities treated it as a tragic accident. Honeymooners often visited the cliffs for photos, and some had slipped before while trying to capture the perfect shot. But something about the scene felt wrong. The items on the ground were arranged too neatly, and there were faint drag marks leading toward the edge. Later, investigators noticed inconsistencies in Marco's story. He claimed Elena had wandered off to take pictures and vanished when he turned his back, yet his timeline was vague and incomplete. His calmness during questioning unsettled officers. There were no tears, no panic, only cold precision in his words. What seemed like a misfortune soon began to look like a meticulously staged crime. The honeymoon had turned into a murder scene. The investigation into Elena's death began immediately, led by the New South Wales police. Marco, the grieving husband, appeared cooperative at first. He told investigators that the two had argued over something trivial, and Elena had stormed off toward the cliff to cool down. When she didn't return, he said he searched frantically before calling for help. His tone was calm, his answers rehearsed, and he appeared strangely composed for someone who had just lost his wife. Officers, initially sympathetic, began to notice inconsistencies. His account of the timeline didn't match witnesses or phone records. Even his description of her final moments seemed oddly detached, as if he were telling a story rather than recalling a tragedy. Security footage from the hotel provided the first major clue. It showed Marco leaving that evening alone, carrying a duffel bag and wearing dark clothes. Hours later, he returned with a different outfit and without the bag. When questioned, he claimed he left it in the car. Police searched the vehicle but found nothing. They also discovered scratches on his forearms and dirt on his shoes, inconsistent with his version of events. Forensic teams examined the cliff area and found two distinct sets of footprints, both belonging to the couple, leading dangerously close to the edge. Only one set returned. Investigators also noticed tire marks, suggesting a quick departure from the scene. The evidence no longer aligned with an accidental fall. Detectives began building a theory that Marco's trip to Australia was not a honeymoon at all, but a carefully planned act. Behind the charm and affection he showed before the wedding hid a darker motive, one rooted in greed and deception. What began as a romantic getaway now looked like premeditated murder. Back in Manila, the news of Elena's death shattered her family. Her parents refused to believe it was an accident, insisting that their daughter was too careful to get that close to a cliff's edge. When Australian investigators reached out for background information, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Elena's sister revealed that, shortly before the wedding, Elena had withdrawn all her savings, the entire amount she had spent years earning as a nurse. She transferred it to Marco's bank account, explaining that he would handle their shared finances once they moved abroad. That money, nearly $25,000, had vanished without a trace. Digging deeper, investigators found that Marco had purchased a life insurance policy for Elena just 2 weeks before the honeymoon. The amount was astonishing, over $500,000, and he was listed as the sole beneficiary. The policy had been rushed through under the pretense of travel protection. To authorities, it looked like the foundation of a plan rather than coincidence. Meanwhile, friends of the couple began sharing unsettling details. They recalled Marco's obsession with money and how he often spoke of wanting to start fresh somewhere new. A coworker mentioned he had been drowning in debt from failed business ventures overseas. These revelations began shaping a chilling narrative that Marco had seen Elena not as a partner, but as a solution to his problems. Australian detectives worked with Philippine authorities to trace his financial history. Every transaction, every policy, and every communication pointed to manipulation. Elena's honeymoon, meant to be a celebration of love, had been orchestrated as the final step in Marco's scheme. The evidence of financial motive turned what once looked like a tragic fall into a deliberate, calculated act of betrayal. Detectives obtained a warrant to search the couple's hotel room, hoping to uncover more evidence of Marco's intentions. What they found confirmed their worst suspicions. Hidden inside his suitcase were several of Elena's personal belongings, her jewelry, a small pouch of cash, and her wedding ring wrapped in tissue. Investigators also discovered a crumpled receipt for a rope purchased 2 days before the trip to Cape Solace. When questioned about it, Marco claimed it was for securing luggage, but there was no trace of any rope among his things. Even more telling was a set of printed airline tickets in his drawer, one-way flights to Manila booked for the day after Elena's death, under his name only. Detectives obtained a warrant for his phone and uncovered text messages that painted a damning picture. Marco had been in frequent contact with a woman in Singapore, a former colleague with whom he had been romantically involved. Their exchanges were intimate and suggestive, with one message reading, "Once everything is done, I'll come to you." In another, he promised her a future together, free from complications. The combination of the messages, financial evidence, and inconsistencies in his story built a strong case. Police quickly realized that Elena's death was not a spontaneous act of rage, but a carefully orchestrated murder disguised as an accident. Marco had used charm and deception to lead his wife into a trap, expecting to walk away rich and unburdened. He was arrested at Sydney Airport as he attempted to board his flight home. Inside his carry-on bag were Elena's passport, her phone, and the same duffel bag he had carried days earlier, a haunting collection of evidence from a honeymoon that had ended in cold-blooded betrayal. The courtroom was filled to capacity on the first day of Marco Santiago's trial. Journalists, curious locals, and members of the Filipino community gathered to witness the proceedings of a case that had shocked both nations. Marco appeared calm as he was led inside, dressed neatly, showing no emotion. He maintained that Elena's death was a tragic accident, that she had slipped while trying to take photos, and that he had been unfairly accused. His defense painted him as a grieving husband misunderstood by the media. But as the prosecution began to present evidence, the calm facade started to crumble. Prosecutors laid out a chilling timeline of manipulation and greed. They presented financial records showing Marco's mounting debts and the life insurance policy that promised him a fortune upon Elena's death. They displayed the text messages to his lover, revealing his secret affair and plans for a new life abroad. Forensic experts testified that Elena's injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall. There were signs of a struggle, bruising on her wrists, and abrasions that indicated she had been pushed. Hotel staff members described the couple's tense behavior, recalling how Marco seemed irritated and distant while Elena appeared anxious. The rental car records, surveillance footage, and the missing duffel bag all fit neatly into a pattern of premeditation. The prosecution called it a honeymoon designed to end in murder. Throughout the trial, Marco remained mostly silent, avoiding eye contact with Elena's family. His expression never softened, not even when photographs of the Cliffside scene were shown. After 3 intense weeks, the jury deliberated for less than a day. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. Marco Santiago was found guilty of murder, a verdict that ended any illusion of his innocence forever. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Elena's mother wept openly, clutching a framed photo of her daughter as tears streamed down her face. The judge spoke firmly, condemning Marco's actions as a deliberate and heartless betrayal. He reminded the court that marriage was built on trust, yet Marco had used that bond to commit an unforgivable act of deceit. The sentence was severe, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As the words echoed through the room, Marco stood motionless, his expression empty, showing neither regret nor emotion. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, holding candles and placards demanding justice for Elena. Her story had touched thousands across Australia and the Philippines. News outlets replayed her smiling wedding photos next to headlines describing the crime, a haunting contrast between love and cruelty. The Filipino community in Sydney organized vigils, their candles flickering in the cold evening air as they prayed for her soul. Donations poured in to help return her remains to her hometown, where her funeral drew hundreds of mourners. Meanwhile, Marco's life unraveled completely. The insurance payout he had hoped for was frozen, and all his assets were seized. His family distanced themselves, ashamed and horrified by what he had done. From behind prison walls, he refused interviews, choosing silence over remorse. Even in confinement, he never admitted guilt or explained why he did it. For Elena's loved ones, justice brought little comfort. Her parents said that no sentence could undo the pain or fill the empty space she left behind. The tragedy became more than a headline. It became a warning about blind trust and hidden greed. What began as a love story ended as one of the most chilling betrayals imaginable. Years after the trial, Elena's story continued to echo across both the Philippines and Australia. Documentaries, articles, and podcasts revisited the case, each retelling the shocking details of how a dream wedding had turned into a calculated murder. People were haunted by the photographs of her smiling in her wedding gown, unaware that the man beside her was planning her death. The tragedy became a symbol of how love can be manipulated by deceit, and how trust, once given blindly, can become a weapon in the wrong hands. Elena's family turned their grief into purpose. They established the Elena Santiago Foundation, a small organization dedicated to educating women about financial awareness, background checks for overseas partners, and recognizing signs of control or manipulation in relationships. Through community talks and online seminars, they hope to protect others from suffering the same fate. Her mother often said that if even one woman was saved because of Elena's story, her daughter's death would not be in vain. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, candles are lit outside the hospital where Elena once worked. Former colleagues remember her as gentle and selfless, a woman who always believed the best in people. In contrast, Marco remains in prison, a forgotten figure whose name now represents betrayal rather than love. He spends his days isolated, the life he tried to build on lies crumbling into nothingness. The story of Marco and Elena Santiago endures as a grim reminder that evil does not always appear as a stranger. Sometimes it hides behind the face of someone you love, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What was meant to be the beginning of a shared life together became the final chapter of hers, written in blood and betrayal.